Hello, everyone. This is Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I have the awesome and the indomitable H.A. Goodman with me today. H.A. kicked up a bit of controversy on a conversation about Israel. I saw the video. I did a clip of the video myself. I kind of was like, I disagree with H.A. on this one, and I kind of made a point of it. Maybe a little too strong, but ultimately I tend to do videos based on how I feel, and at that moment I was feeling pretty strong about it. So H.A. contacted me with an awesome tweet, and he was like, hey, not a tweet, a direct message, essentially having this conversation that, look, I respect your perspective on this. And just as a back and forth, eventually it became to, hey, I want to bring you on the show, and in which case H.A. is here. So, H.A., please tell everyone hello.
Hello, everybody. And Jamal, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. I'm honored, and I love your show. And I just, I'm very happy to speak with you.
Very cool, man. Very cool. So, the first video I saw, it was a video that made this point that liberals should just support Hamas if they're not necessarily going to criticize both sides. I didn't. Let me ask this. Let me establish a basis of our shared reality in the sense of what each of us believes to be reality. And I'm not saying this in a surly way. I just mean, what do each of us perceive to be true? That's all. Just a basis. Do you believe that in political conversations, like the conversation we're about to have now, that religion doesn't really play a role, that ultimately you can't necessarily have a conversation about God if we're having a conversation about politics, that this is for the most part secular, and all notions of God in this case are either to give reasons for either theft or killing, or in some cases resistance? Or don't we agree on that?
No, I agree with you on that. I think that, this is a secular issue. This is not an issue of religion.
Okay, fair enough. Now, do you believe what Israel was given the land in like 1917, something to that effect? Do you believe that the Brits had the right to give away land that somebody else was living on at the time?
If you're referring to the Jewish claim on the land, Jesus was Jewish. So I'm not saying that Palestinians don't have a claim. I'm saying that Jews and Palestinians have a claim. I think that Jamal, do you have the tweets that you were initially referring to, like my initial tweet regarding the, like liberals should?
It wasn't a tweet, it was a video.
Yeah.
It was the video itself that went up. I didn't even see the tweets.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, my vantage point regarding that was this. It's not that I have never stated to anybody that if you support a Palestinian state, or if you believe Israel is committing crimes, or if you believe that Israel is 100% at fault or 5% at fault, I've never stated that to discuss or critique Israel, you must support Hamas. That's never been my take. My point was this: there are two sides to this story regarding what's taking place, even with the issue of Jerusalem. And for people to harp and say that it's only one side, it's only Israel, it's only Israel committing atrocities, it's only this, only that, then by logical extension, I would say that, well, I'm asking either Abby Martin or anyone who has the opinion that Israel is 100% at fault. A, do you acknowledge that Hamas is a terror organization? If the person can't, so I'm explaining my vantage point. If the person, if the person says no, Hamas is not a terror organization, then I'd point to, well, Europe's highest court, other nations around the world have stated it's a terror group. It blows up buses, it launches rockets, it deliberately, intentionally targets civilians. B, if a person says, yes, I support Hamas, then just be honest. But my vantage point is just, I think, a rational extension of logic. I'm not saying that you must support Hamas. I'm saying at least if your vantage point is that it's 100% Israel. At least acknowledge that Hamas is a terror group, and they're part of, and the acknowledgement of that is part of the equation. I think that what people do, and the reason I stated that, is that they look at one side, focus on one side, and it's almost like there's no other side to this. It's only Israel at fault. And then I said, well, you know what? If you feel that way, what about Hamas? Do you support it? Do you not support it?
I feel you. I think I understand it. Bringing in Jesus comes across as religious to me, which is why I kind of started off asking, do you believe that in political conversations, religion doesn't apply? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is creating a stake to the claim of the land that precedes whoever was living there before. That's a hard argument. That's all. And that argument depends upon people having a religious tenor to even accept that Jesus was a part of this conversation.
No, I didn't mean like the Son of God. I meant like, I didn't mean that the Son of God was Jewish or whatever. I didn't mean that. I didn't say it from a religious sense. I meant to say that in Roman times and Greek times, before BC, the Jews, there were Jews there. So and then when people say, well, that's a long time ago, then my rebuttal is, well, I guess Israel has to wait 2,000 years, that it won't be an issue. I'm saying, like, if people disregard that, because a lot of people say to me, well, Roman times is 2,000 years ago. I'm like, well, okay. Then you're saying that Israel just waits 2,000 years and then Palestinians now don't have a claim. I'm actually agreeing with you that Palestinians do have a claim, but I'm also saying that Jews have a claim as well. That's all I'm saying.
I feel you. It's just, look, it comes across as if the Brits gave away land that didn't belong to them to give away. That Brits were essentially promising anything that they could give or anything that they can promise, even stuff that they didn't necessarily own, to get their ass out of that war. It seems a little dicey to me that a bunch of people is living in a particular area. And as those people live in a particular area, some other group of people come to that area and then say, we stake claim to this because 2,000 years ago, we lived here. That's a little strong to me. And I have to be honest, man, it comes across as if, let me ask you this.
One second. To your point, though, real quick, it's not just like Europeans came across and there were no Jews there. There have always been Jews living in Jerusalem, in the Jewish section of Jerusalem. There have always been Jews. Again, my vantage point is that I'm not saying the Palestinians have never had an actual state. It was the Ottoman Empire before the British.
I understand.
The Jews had an actual state there, and the Romans destroyed the temple. And there was Masada and all of these. I mean, if you go back in history, you can actually say that there were Jews there that actually had a foothold politically. I'm not saying, though, that Palestinians don't have a claim to the land. In 1947, there was a partition. The Jews agreed, the Arabs did not agree, and then 7 nations attacked Israel. In one of the few instances where Jews actually won in Jewish history, they won. So it's like, okay, everyone brings up UN resolutions. There was a UN partition, and the Jews accepted, the Arabs did not accept. And again, I'm always going back, Jamal, to the issue, to the point of this. It's such a supercharged topic because I think there's so much propaganda around it. I am not saying there are Jewish people saying perhaps that Palestinians don't have a right to it. I'm not saying that. I know Palestinian people. I've been to Israel, met Palestinian people. There are Palestinian Arabs who are Jewish. Who are Israeli citizens. There are also Black Israelis from Ethiopia who are just as Jewish as I am. In some ways, historically, it's said that they have a greater link. The Ethiopian Black Jews have a greater link to the Jewish temple. What I'm saying is this whole notion that Zionism is racism and everything is done because some extremist Jewish person said something insane. Therefore, all of Israel is created upon this racist ideology. It's not true. It's not true. There were wars that took place after those wars. A lot of horrible things happened. The occupation is very brutal. But I mean, I'll let you continue. I'm just saying that my vantage point.
Fine. Like I said, this is a conversation. I'm not. I don't mean it to be an interrogation. That's not my intention. At least that's not the thing. I'm trying to establish, I guess, a basis of understanding in regards to the perspective. I look at it as you had a bunch of people who were living in a particular area. You had another group of people that start flooding into that area with Western powers saying, okay, you can have this land now. Then one side of the group said, okay, we're going to have a partition. Why does somebody else have to agree to a partition for something? It's like the Native Americans should have agreed to, to share the land with the white men as they came into the countryside. And because they didn't agree to this, that, they were somehow wrong. It's not necessarily wrong for a group of people to be in a population center and have another group of people to come into that particular population center, and they don't necessarily like it. Are you saying that they have no right whatsoever to say we don't like this? That ultimately they should have taken whatever the UN said that they should have taken?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that for example, and I've had this rebuttal to my claims with the reference to Native Americans. When you look at the history of the Spaniards enslaving and committing a genocide, Bartolomé de las Casas, when he explained in his testimony exactly what was taking place, it was an enslavement of people for gold, for the Spanish to acquire, and then you go on to American history, broken treaties, and then there are less Native Americans now because of this kind of genocidal type of thing, where it's
you're saying Israel is not committing genocide.
I'm saying the issue.
And by the way, that's not the argument I'm making. I'm not taking it.
I know you're not. What I'm trying to say is that the Palestinian population has increased 8-fold since 1948. Number two, it wasn't simply an issue of people saying, hey, get out of here, white Jews. Why are you even moving here from Europe? It was an issue of there were always Jews there, even when there were more Palestinians.
I understand.
The Jews came, because they have a historical tie to the land, and a cultural tie and everything that's goes thousands of years back. But the issue was not that it was this diplomatic type of, hey, let's go ahead and discuss this because this is wrong. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, which was the one of the leaders, Palestinian leaders, was allied with Hitler at the time of during World War II.
Yeah.
When in 1948, when Israel declared independence, it wasn't, hey, we're going to go ahead and go to the United Nations and protest this. It was 7 Arab armies attacking one nation. I'm not saying that, again, this justifies a brutal occupation, because the occupation is brutal. And I understand the Palestinians are suffering. But that is the context. The context is a lot of what's taken place is because numerous Arab nations lost wars with Israel. The West Bank was controlled by Jordan. Gaza was controlled by Egypt before 1967. So, I mean...
Yeah, they failed.
They failed.
They failed in the 7-Day War. I remember. Well, not remember. I wasn't there.
But I mean,
come on.
All I'm saying...
So we're talking about they're establishing a country on somebody else's country. I guess I don't bring up the Native American thing in order for this idea of genocide. That's not where I'm going with it. I'm trying to make this point that somebody else was in a particular place. I understand that Jews were in that spot beforehand. I even remember during the Ottoman Empire, yes. Ottoman Empire brought in Jews. Yes, that's true. And I'm not rebuffing that at all. You're right. But there's a difference between somebody else's land. Like you're establishing a continent, you're establishing a country on somebody else's land. And you're saying that these other countries don't necessarily have a right to rebuff the fact that they're establishing a country on somebody else's land. I'm sorry, this tether comes across as being this religious idea to me, that there's some claim to that particular land. The people who are already there, I'm establishing a place on this land. And I understand that you people don't necessarily like me doing this, but I'm doing it. And when they get pissed off and when they try to fight back, they win. Israel wins. They win. They win. They push back the armies and they take land, and Palestine becomes a stateless territory. What is called Nakba, the disaster, the catastrophe. We've become stateless. Are you saying that they don't necessarily have a right to even rebuff the fact that somebody else is trying to make a country on their land? And I understand you're saying, I think our disconnect here is, I don't necessarily believe anyone has any connection to anything. If you're there, if you're at a particular place, if you're there, if you're living in a particular territory, it's a little weird to me that other people come back and say, hey, we used to be here 2,000 years ago. Now we're taking this back. Come on. That's a little.
Well, wait, well, but okay, let me ask you this then.
Go for it. Go for it.
Is that the litmus test? Because, okay, aside from that, there were Jews there in 1947, in 1930, in 1910, in 1890. But what I'm trying to say is the litmus test 2,000 years? Because they were physically, it's not just like, oh, Jews are praying and it's important to them. They were physically Jews, lots of Jews there 2,000 years ago, and they were kicked out by the Romans, and then some Jews stayed. So is the litmus test you wait 2,000 years? Because if I'm not saying you're saying that, but I'm saying if that's the case, then 2,000 years from now, if someone, all Israel has to do is wait 2,000 years and say, hey, you know what? Nobody has a claim. We were there.
No, it's not that. It's not that. I guess I'm making this point of who was there. Like it's not this thing of somebody has a claim or somebody doesn't have a claim. A people was living in a particular territory. Western powers made the decision to split that territory up, one, and to allow another group of people to come there in mass. Now, I'm not necessarily saying there weren't Jews there. Fair enough. But there are people everywhere. Like you could find Jews all over the world. Like this, making the saying that they have a claim to this specific territory because of a period of time ago they used to be there. My point is, if somebody was living there, if somebody was there, you had a group of people who were there. Yes, you had Jews there. I would imagine Jews were in the significant minority. You had a group of people there. The Western powers made the decision that we were going to set up a country in this particular spot. And those people balked. Are you saying it is wrong for those people to balk because Jews had some claim to the land going back X number of thousands of years? That's all I'm getting at. I'm trying to establish this thing of.
No, I'm not saying. Listen, I've never said that the Palestinians should just be happy that they're being occupied. I never said that. And I also, the interesting thing is that people, like when debating on Twitter, people have accused me of, oh, so you agree with everything that's horrible that's taking place. You agree with the atrocities being committed. No, but I also don't. Yeah, no, but I also, this is the thing. The whole origins of Israel, like who has a claim to the land, whether or not the Palestinians, whether or not when they were drawing, because you go in the history of the Middle East, the Western powers drew the whole map of the Middle East. So the Sykes-Picot. So whether or not they were going to draw a map for the Palestinians, I don't believe they were. The Jordan owned the West Bank and Egypt owned Gaza in 1967. But this is, my point is this: I think that to answer your question, I've never stated that the Palestinians should not, should accept not having a state. I never said. In fact, I want them to have a state. But at right now, there are two factions within the Palestinian political movement. One is Hamas, and one is Fatah in the West Bank. They hate each other, and they've hated each other for a long time. In 2007, they had a civil war where Hamas would parade Fatah members, dead around the streets of Gaza. So, and I have, the articles. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not a only one-sided view. I'm not even saying, like, I have my vantage point, I have my thing. I'm not even saying that people shouldn't critique Israel or think that it's mostly at fault. No. What I'm saying is when they come after me and they show me pictures of dead bodies, which is horrendous, I can go ahead and show pictures of blown up buses. It's that same type of thing. Do you see this? Do you agree with this? It's like, no, dude, that's not, I never said that. I never agreed with it. That's my vantage point.
And I do make a distinction between those things. I mean, even in your videos, you kind of made this point of, I'm not saying that this other stuff is great. I'm just saying there are two sides.
But Jamal, you hear that. Nobody else, like the people who don't like my vantage point, they do not hear that. They don't even acknowledge that.
I hear it. I totally hear it. So I do hear it. I think. Let me ask you this, Abby Martin. I listened to your Abby Martin video, and I was listening to the Twitter thing back and forth between you two guys. Abby Martin made a point. She said Hamas exists for specific reasons. Now, I grant you this.
Jamal, can I ask you a quick question, real quick, from what you said? What if I said the brutal occupation exists for specific reasons? I mean, a person would think I'm an asshole. So what I'm trying to say is, if I go ahead and I say to you, Daniel Shavers today,
Yeah.
If that guy was murdered, just like John Crawford was murdered, just like, so if I said John Crawford, Daniel Shavers were killed for specific reasons, that is a deliberate attempt to whitewash or circumvent some nasty issues. So my whole thing is, it's not just, yeah, I know Hamas there's a power vacuum there. I know Hamas, it's a brutal occupation, and the, Islamist, very militant movement said, the heck with this, we're going to fight back. But okay, they're a terror group. They specifically target civilians. I'm not saying that Israel doesn't commit atrocities in the occupied territories. My overall point has always been, there are two sides. A person could say it's 80% Israel, but at least give some issues to the fact that Fatah and the West Bank government and the government in Gaza, they hate each other.
Yeah.
So if they hate each other, how can it be only Israel? That's my only point. That's my main overall point.
I understand that point, and I think
And look, by the way, for you to even, I just want to let you know something, Jamal, and get ready for this. For you to even have a discussion with me, where you agree with me 60% of the time, you're going to get hate from people.
Oh, I don't care about that. If I agree, I agree. If I disagree, I disagree. I guess for me, it's I look at this stuff as, it's funny. In one of your videos, you was like the perfunctory, complex situation. I do look at it that way, but I look at it that way for a particular reason. Hamas exists for specific reasons. Come on, you know what you meant. Like this one, this is not. Come on, be fair. They exist for specific reasons. I understand your point. Anything exists for specific reasons. Everything exists for specific reasons. We're just being human beings, and the way we converse with one another, they do exist for specific reasons. If an African-American kid is shot by a cop in the United States, and they find it on a video that drugs was planted on that kid, and the society erupts in protests, does that society have a right to be pissed off at what took place?
The African-American experience is the antithesis of what's taking place in the Middle East. You have Martin Luther King.
No, it is not. I'm sorry, it's not. I disagree with you on that.
But wait, where's the nonviolent movement?
What do you mean, where's the nonviolent movement? There are nonviolent movements.
I'm talking about in Gaza. There's no nonviolent.
I'm talking about in Gaza too. Are you telling me that every last Palestinian that's picked up by Israel is purely violent?
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying? Like there are no peace movements in Israel at all, or in Gaza?
Absolutely
Zero.
Not. Absolutely, I'm not saying that at all. But there's no. I don't see a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Medgar Evers or Freedom Riders.
But you do see Malcolm X. I mean, come on. You have a situation where people are kept in really shitty situations. I can go into the Human Rights Watch. If I can go to Human Rights Watch and point out issues where they're detaining kids, where they're killing kids, where it's essentially a lawless reason. They are, for the most part, fundamentally stateless under military rule. And you understand that people put in difficult situations don't necessarily come out with this peace and love thing. Martin Luther King was an aberrant behavior. I mean, that was a tactic. That wasn't necessarily because he had this peace and love thing in him. Yes, he had the peace and love thing in him. He was a minister. But there are speeches where there's this famous speech. Well, not famous. I don't know if it's famous. I don't know if it's famous. It's famous to me. I thought it was fucking awesome. Where Martin Luther King is giving the speech and he's talking about being heckled. Like some kid heckles him. He's like, Martin Luther King, we look at the guy as a cartoon almost, this peace and love thing. But he's annoyed by the fact that he was like, how dare this guy heckle me? I'm fucking Martin Luther King. But as he sits and he thinks about it and he lets his pride go away, he makes this point of saying, yeah, that kid is put in a difficult situation. And because he's put in a difficult situation, that kid responds in a particular way. And those people, for the most part, fundamentally, even went to Malcolm X, where Malcolm X had this massive movement of people who are pissed off. Do you believe that being pissed off or peace and love is the most natural reaction to being put in dire straits in difficult situations?
Of course not. And I'll also say that Ehud Barak, who was one of the prime ministers of Israel, stated, I don't think this is apocryphal, but I remember from what I remember, he stated this, that if he was born Palestinian, he would have joined Hamas.
That's my point. This is my point.
And I agree.
That's my point.
I agree with that. I'm not, see, my overall point was, my whole, I had 2 points.
Specific reasons is the one I'm getting at. Hamas exists for specific reasons. And I'm saying that Abby Martin, yes, it's Twitter, so it's shorthand. Fair enough. And you may take it as being dismissive. Fair enough. And I did hear about the exchange where she was like, well, I shouldn't have to explain this to you. You should fully understand. It's where both sides essentially harden in their perspective of, I'm not listening to you and you're not listening to me, that type of stuff. But what she meant was those specific reasons, the reasons that you just mentioned, saying, I would perfectly understand that I was born into that situation. I would be in one of those groups that are somewhat hostile to the Israeli government. You just said you understood it.
See, I'm not saying, look, there is a reason Hamas exists. Just like there's a reason that in 1948, the 7 militaries went after Israel.
That's true.
It has always, the Hamas mentality is an old mentality. It's not a new thing. The Hamas mentality happened before the occupation, before 1967. Before 1967, there were terror attacks, rocket attacks, and wars between Israel and Arab states. My overall point is that anyone who comes to me and says, it's 100% Israel's fault, I will simply ask, well, what do you think of Hamas? And if some people are honest, Jamal, and they'll say, I agree with Hamas, fuck, Israel, and I hope that they do everything. Well, okay, good. You think it's a terrorist organization? Fuck yes, a terrorist organization. Israel's a terrorist state. Fine. But that is such an extreme, what I consider an insane viewpoint, that you will never get an Abby Martin to speak like that. What she'll say is, well, they exist for specific reasons. If I said to you, well, God, they're detaining kids for specific reasons. You want to get hit by a rock? If I said that to you, I'd be an asshole. So I'm not saying that. I don't say, when someone says to me, when someone shows me a picture of all these dead bodies, I don't say, well, gee whiz, Hamas planted the rocket there. What do you expect a greater power to do? I say, this is horrendous. It's horrible. And those people should be alive. I want another round of peace talks. I want Israel to negotiate with Hamas, just like the British negotiated with the IRA. I want Israel to negotiate. I want Hamas and Fatah to make peace. And I want Israel to negotiate with every relevant Palestinian political group to make peace, so there's a Palestinian state. But see, I don't think, I'm not talking about you, Jamal. I don't think people on the left, and this is the same thing that I saw during the election, I don't think people on the left really care about the Palestinians, because you know what I get? The response I get when I say, hey, there are human rights watch articles on Hamas and Amnesty International articles on Hamas. When they torture and kill Palestinians, I get responses like, well, what do you expect? It's a nascent movement. It's a nascent government. All governments engage in that brutality. So wait a second now. They're coming at me. They're saying, you don't care about Palestinians? I'm like, well, wait a second. Here's an example of Hamas torturing and killing Palestinians. No response there. So again, my vantage point is not, it's definitely not that Israel's perfect, and it's definitely not that everyone should focus only on Hamas. It's two sides of the equation. You focus only on one side, you're going to ignore, and you're going to use, speaking of Abby Martin, her producer used words like exterminate. Now, 6 million Jews died, 1.5 million Armenians died, 2 million Cambodians died. In Rwanda, they shipped in machetes to chop people up. In a matter of 3 months, 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis died at the hand of Hutus.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is those populations did not increase eightfold. Those populations were murdered and slaughtered, and families and children were their heads were decapitated and shot, and wanton mass slaughter. So when I hear words like exterminate, then I say, okay, this is going to an area where there's no like H.A. Jamal discussion. It's just
it's hyperbolic at that point.
Hate, you know, and that was my point. I just my critique of Abby Martin was that, I mean, it was bolstered by her producer, who thinks that literally there's a genocide taking place. It's that there's such extreme views that the reality of the situation doesn't even take a second to look at perhaps the issue, the role of Hamas. There's not just Hamas, there's Islamic Jihad. There are other states funding these terror attacks. I do understand why people would be upset and why they would flock to Hamas, but it's part of the equation in my book.
I feel you. I looked up how many people Hamas killed with the mortar attacks. There were 44, and I don't want to say only 44. There were 44 people killed from attacks from Gaza with these rockets, these makeshift rockets. I give you this. Abby Martin, they might have been a little hyperbolic. Fair enough. Exterminate is a little strong when you look at other things like Rwanda, genocide, Native Americans, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you get where they're coming from, and I think look, Hamas.
I get where you're coming from. I don't get where they're coming from.
It's fair enough to say that they were considered a terrorist organization. Fair enough, or at the very least, other countries considered them to be a terrorist organization. Fair enough. Groups, and again, you're right. Human Rights Watch, et cetera, et cetera. Again, fair enough. I think the thing that people chafe at least on the left, they chafe at this idea of parity between the two. Like, it feels like saying that, well, you never bring up Hamas, or you guys don't bring up Hamas. It feels like there is a balance between those two things. I mean, you have one side that has an air force, a navy, and an army, and has nuclear weapons and gets $3 billion a year from the United States. And the other side has rockets. It's the first war that I've ever seen where they said the number of rockets that were fired between two sides. It was fucking amazing. It was like, I can't think of any other war when the United States attacked Iraq. Never mentioned how many rockets the United States fired into Iraq, but they call it a war. My issue is the parity. And I guess I would argue that their issue is probably the parity, this combination between the two. To say that both sides have value. And I understand the argument of Hamas. Hamas is considered to be a terrorist organization. Fair enough. And yes, there were other organizations. Yeah, the Fatah, that was another one. I can't think of the guy's name. Arafat was in one of the other organizations. But that's kind of besides the point. I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you. Or at the very least, I acknowledge that other organizations have said that these guys were terrorist organizations. Some, not all. I mean, there are some nations around the world that consider Hamas to be the rightful government of that area. And they were elected. And just in 2017, they've come out and softened their stance, saying that they're okay with the 1967 lines with Israel. I agree with you on another point. Hamas is counterproductive. It's immensely counterproductive. Like this thing of Martin Luther King in Palestine. It's a different religion. So these guys look at this stuff through different lenses, but they use religion as this kind of vehicle for resistance. So I accept that part. The bombings and stuff, when you're going with the superior force, is somewhat counterproductive. And I think that's one of the things Martin Luther King got right. You're not going to win against a country that has nuclear weapons. You're not going to win that battle. That strategy is a little rough. And I remember when something took place where they killed somebody, and that started another "quote unquote" war. I can't remember all the details. But look, I'll give you that. Let's say, I take it as a flat fact that other countries around the world have said that these guys are a terrorist organization. Fair enough. But you understand Abby Martin's point on this one. These guys.
Well, I can't speak for. I understand your viewpoint because we're talking, and I understand you disagree with me, and I can tell you now.
Just so I'm clear, I would give you that other organizations, other countries consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization. If other nations, however, if we're going with this argument that other nations are holding sway in regards to the perspective of a particular entity or country or something like that, is it also true that other nations consider Israel a rogue nation at this point, being that for the most part they've blown off
I mean,
UN resolutions and everything else?
Look, Israel is a nation just like any other nation, and
it's slightly different. It's slightly different, at least in this specific case. In your video, you made a very specific argument saying that other nations consider Hamas to be a rogue nation or a terrorist organization. Fair enough. If we're using other nations as a benchmark, is it also true that other nations can essentially continuously condemn Israel, with the United States being the sole vote trying to protect Israel?
Yeah, other nations condemn Israel, but it's still a country. My point though,
was it? Yeah. Never said it wasn't. Look, personally, I believe Israel has a right to survive. I don't think it's one of the things.
I guess to your previous point, real quickly. Look, there's dialogue that you and I are having right now where you disagree with me, and then there's rabid frothing at the mouth hatred and extremist and hyperbole and so that is not. I think that the majority of people. Yeah, the majority of people who did, and I'm talking like Abby Martin's producer. I'm talking about a person who, there's documentaries that, so a great many people watch, and their viewpoints are, oh my God, there's only one side, and there will always be only one side until Israel is completely destroyed. And so it's like,
no,
not you, but Jamal. Hold on one second.
I don't even
not
think Abby thinks that.
I don't think Abby thinks that. Well, I'm not saying, I don't know what Abby Martin thinks. So I'm not going to say, but all I can tell you is that the people that have come after me on Twitter or social media, after I literally they take so much time to say, I want a Palestinian state. I understand the occupation is brutal. I'm not saying that Israel's perfect. I understand that there are atrocities committed, but let's just look at what the wars, the suicide bombings. We're talking in some years, there are 40 suicide bombings. In America, if that happened here, it would be CNN, MSNBC. I'm talking left and right media would unite to be like, terror, terror, terror. Like, that's one. There are some years in Israel where there's 40 suicide bombings and rockets. So I'm just my overall point was, hey, look at the other side. That's all I'm saying. Look at the other side. And whereas you're not saying that, you want Israel destroyed, I can tell you right now, there are a lot of people on the left who have I guess it's good because they're honest, but who've openly stated, I hope Israel is destroyed. It's a racist, say Zionism is racism. And if they went to Israel, they would see black Jews. If they went to, Zionism is not the core of it. Yeah, sure, there might be, like you said, some messianic type religious people. That's also on Hamas too. That's also on that's why I don't like when people criticize Islam. I always say on my channel, even though like a lot of conservatives watch my channel, I always say, look, I love Islam, I love the people, I know amazing Muslims. I'm not going to judge all Muslims by the extreme. What they do with the Zionism is always been about the creation of a Jewish state. Never had anything to do with DNA or race or anything, because there's Jews everywhere. They were kicked out everywhere. So there's Jews that look differently. There are Jews that are black, and there are Jews that are like a lot whiter than me. So, and then all shades of color in between. So it's not about race. The issues with the roads and the occupation and the fact that there were two separate entities of Palestinian territories, that is a nasty, brutal political situation. And it's not apartheid where there's different shades. Like in the apartheid, I remember studying apartheid because I'm old enough, in my early 40s, in middle school when it was still going on. And there were in South Africa, different shades of black got different. They could do certain things that other shades of black could not. This has nothing to do in Israel right now. It's not about race or DNA or blood. That's not what it's about at all. It's about a political situation, because there are a million Israeli Arabs and they have the same rights, and they're in the Knesset. And if, you know, if they're mistreated as a minority, that's also, I understand that. But that was, you know, that happens with minorities, not so much like a DNA thing. What I'm saying is the Zionism is racism. The Israel is committing genocide. That mentality is a mentality that I think is just so far from reality. People truly believe it. And there's a lot of people, like I said, who are like, you know, Israel should not exist. I can't wait till it's destroyed, da da da. And these are the same people. A lot of them are the same people who want single payer. So people come to me like, you know, what's wrong with you, HA? You know, you're really good with Bernie and hating on Clinton, but you really don't know anything about geopolitics. You do know Zionism is racism, right? And that Israel is committing genocide. I'm like, no, that's not the reality of the situation. You've been watching too many documentaries from certain people. So, I mean, that's my take on points you. Certain points.
I feel you. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to areas of Palestine, at least Bethlehem. My feeling of it was, it's an awkward civilization. Let me put it that way. And I don't mean awkward in a bad way. I just mean from an American going, you're sitting in Jerusalem, you're stopping getting something to eat, and this soldier sits down with a machine gun and just puts it, you know, behind his back and eats a full awful. And you're like, holy shit, that's a massive gun. Let me ask you this: if they weren't in occupied territory, do you believe that people will be responding with suicide bombing? Meaning, suicide bombing is a weapon of the weak. It's not necessarily because you have this strong, overwhelming military. If they were trying to rebel, do you believe that there's? Let me say it this way: what is an H.A. Goodman approved way of rebelling?
Listen, like I said, if I can tell you right now that if I
and wait, I didn't mean to be surly with that.
If I grew up in Gaza, I would probably join Hamas.
But that's what I'm
just
getting.
Like, but what I'm trying to say is because I'd be so pissed off that okay, I'm going to join this militant movement, and like Ehud Barak said, obviously it's a very natural thing if you are a young person and you see your friends
you're pissed off.
Pissed off getting killed or whatever. So you want to fight the higher power. I understand the dynamics. I also understand.
Let me just put a fine point on this. I don't want to undermine this. Sometimes when having conversations, we have these conversations and make things seem it's like saying it never necessarily gets across the reality of the thing that you're talking about. It's always this kind of esoteric thing. To say that, yes, I understand that there are atrocities doesn't necessarily get across the gravity of the atrocities. You're a kid, you're living in a particular area, and your dad gets dragged away. Or some other kid gets pissed off and throws a rock, and some soldier shoots him. Chris Hedges talks about this case where somebody shot a kid after they're, hurling obscenities at the kids themselves. Like the mowing the lawn thing, the breaking the silence thing, where these guys were dropping bombs in areas that they knew full well contain residents. I understand. Look, the reason why lefties get kind of, their asses in a bunch on this has to do with this thing in lefties where, yes, part of it is the underdog, but part of it also is this thing of suffering. And look, the reason why people, like you said, some people, these are the same people for single payer. They're for single payer for a reason. It's not just political points. They believe that people are having difficult and dire straits and uncomfortable and unfortunate situations that was not caused by themselves at all. They also believe that rebelling in the sense of Hamas is a strike back. It's a pushback, not necessarily an original thing, meaning that Hamas wouldn't necessarily exist if there was no occupying force for Hamas to actually fight against. I understand your point, and I full well understand, and I can even agree with you. What Hamas does is somewhat counterproductive to the situation. They have these violent pushbacks in a capacity where they know there's no way they can win. It's like sending fucking rockets. It's like, I understand you have this, this gut level, oh, I'm sending a rocket into Israel, I'm angry. And I don't begrudge that, but God damn it, it doesn't necessarily, one side has nuclear weapons and the other side has these shittily made rockets. So I agree with you. Hamas is not productive in this. They're not. I agree. Full agree. You have my complete agreement.
You're going to get a lot of hate for that.
Oh, they can get all the hate they want. It's just true. One side is nuclear weapons, the other side is rockets. So it's not something you can win. Martin Luther King didn't do peace because he thought peace was an awesome fucking idea. He did it because it was a strategical thing.
No, I'm saying that when you said that Hamas was counterproductive, I'm saying you're going to get hate for saying that.
Oh, I can get hate for it. I mean, it's true. It's not. I don't like this idea of the occupation. I don't have this idea in my head that Israel should be destroyed. However, people live there. It's what my reasoning for that Israel shouldn't be destroyed is my same reasoning that Israel shouldn't have been there. Like, how can I say this? It sounds like I'm saying two different things, but I'm not. If a person is there, if people are there, it seems a little dicey to me to take the land from those people in order to establish another country. By the same token, Israel is already there. Meaning at this point, this idea of trying to take the land from Israel or getting rid of the country itself seems immensely counterproductive. It's almost like it's a reality you have to live with. And for the most part, I think Hamas has accepted the fact that Israel is going to be there. Whether or not these guys start firing off rockets again is a separate question. I guess I'm making this point, though, that lefties look at this from the standpoint of there is somebody occupying somebody else's territory. And in occupying somebody else's territory, the people who are being occupied should have just this human right to fight back or to resist in this way. It seems unfair that the United States and Israel can solely say these guys are terrorists. And the other nations, fair enough, will say also that these guys are terrorists. But terrorists is a perspective, if that makes sense. Like, it's like when the United States is bombing other countries, or let me say it this way. When the United States is bombing one country after the next, and I would imagine you will be against the United States invading many of those other countries without any kind of constitutional justification to do so. That's technically a terrorist attack. We're using terror, using our own definitions. We're inciting terror in other countries in order to get those countries to capitulate in regards to political objectives. Israel, Hamas, those things can be flipped one side or the other in the sense of Hamas saying we're resisting these oppressors and Israel saying we're resisting the terrorists. This is a thicket. I mean, honestly, it's a thicket.
Okay, a couple points.
Is that fair? Is that a fair characterization? This is somewhat of a thicket in the sense of you have an occupying force and there's other force that's resisting the occupying force. One considers a terrorist, the other guy considers himself a freedom fighter.
I agree that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Yes, but that doesn't. If this is the case, if indeed people on the left view Hamas to be doing something noble, then they should simply say, they support Hamas. I mean,
noble is too clean. Yeah, noble is too clean. If noble is too clean, it's
what?
It's like,
I'm sorry.
Noble is too clean. It's
okay. Like, for example, okay, fine, but see. I guess it kind of relates back to my original point in regards to Jews just coming up on the scene. Like I said, they've been there for thousands of years. Whether more Jews came and Palestinians were there, it wasn't a situation in 1948 where it was, hey, let's find some kind of diplomatic solution. It was obliterate, destroy. 7 nations lost. Okay, Israel won. Now the paradigm has changed. So it was an arm wrestling match that in the first time, one of the few times in Jewish history, the Jews won. Jews usually have lost battles and have been persecuted. So it's one of the few times in Jewish history where Jews won. 1967, same thing. At the end of the day, what do people who only focus on the atrocities committed by Israel and then either whitewash or kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, Hamas is bad, but gosh, look at what they're up against. What do these people at the end of the day want? Is it really the Palestinian? Do they support Palestinian, or do they love the Palestinian people? Do they support the Palestinian people? Do they want a Palestinian state? Because I don't hear from people talking about the chasm between Fatah and Hamas. They don't even get along. They hate each other. So my vantage point is, well, okay, what's the end goal? Because Israel's not going to just not exist. So the end goal is that there has to be some kind of peaceful resolution to where there are talks. I do understand there are extremists on the right in Israel that they build the settlements and that hurts the talks and and all these things, but at the end of the day, eventually, there has to be another push towards peace talks. And if that fails, there has to be another push. But the mentality of only focusing on Israel's atrocities, ignoring the atrocities committed on the Palestinian side. Yes, I understand there's an imbalance of power, but if you continually play that over and over again, you have the same thing that's taken place for years and years and years. A stalemate where the higher power is going to respond overwhelmingly to what it perceives to be threats like rockets, or it is threats, rockets, suicide bombings, all these things. They'll respond overwhelmingly. The death toll will be disproportionate. It will be an unfair fight, but at the same time, you're going to there are these factions within the Palestinian political movement that don't even get along, that they hate each other too.
I don't understand what that has to do with anything. I got to be honest. I know you mentioned that, but I don't see what that has to do with anything. I guess what I'm getting at is, but you can fully understand that occupying somebody else's land, those people are going to respond in a particular way. And it's not so much that you're whitewashing or people are whitewashing Hamas. At least I don't take it that way. I think they look at it as between the two, there's a massive, disparate use of force between the two. Like, so you have a situation where, like the last one, the last of Fatah, a rocket, Palestinians, I think it was maybe 40 Israelis were killed, 2,000 Palestinians, with 80% being civilians. That is so disproportionate. Like it goes beyond this thing of we're responding to this kind of force thing. And I agree with you, man. This idea of rockets flying into the territory, it freak people out. I mean, whether you're killing people or not, at the end of the day, you're still freaking people out. But you're freaking people out because they're pissed off that you're occupying their land. That's what I'm getting at. This is not.
Yeah, but the whole thing is a chicken and egg. Why is the land being occupied? Is it just
the land has been occupied because they decided to take the land when Brits gave the land away?
Okay, but it's not just that. The Jews did not own, the Israelis did not own the West Bank or Gaza up until 1967.
Right.
So and that was a war with 5 nations against 1. And so after that, yes, they were occupying those territories, and it's been a horrible, brutal occupation. I'm not even debating that. But at the end of the day, there has to be some kind, because I don't know, like, what are the Ben Nortons and the Abby Martins and all the people, like big voices on the left? What do they want? They want Israel to disappear tomorrow?
No. Look, I can tell you what they want. At least I can tell you what I want. A fair settlement. At this point, you're right. Israel is not going anywhere. So flat fact, Israel is not going anywhere. So that means that there needs to be some consensus or some settlement between those two things. You have two options. Either the land is essentially given entirely to Israel, in which case Palestinians become this kind of apartheid state, or there's a 2-nation settlement. If there's a 2-nation settlement, there's an argument that there's not even enough land to create a 2-nation settlement, because for the most part, Israel is gobbling up the land.
Yeah,
do you believe that the settlement building is illegal?
Yeah, the settlements are, even a lot of, I think a great many Israelis hate the settlements.
Yeah.
They actually hate the settlements because, like, their tax dollars go to protection of the settlements, and it's a waste of money. They don't want the settlements there, a lot of them. I'm not advocating that that Israel continually build land on land that they shouldn't be building land on. That's not my vantage point has never been good. You know, they're building on Palestinian land. This is fantastic. No, that's obviously a hindrance to peace. But the longer this goes, the longer.
Do you believe that Netanyahu is actually trying to go for this 2-state settlement? I've made this point that I think it's a dog and pony show. And look, I think it's a dog and pony show in both ways. I think both right-wingers, meaning Hamas and Benjamin Netanyahu, neither one of these people will actually want peace. I think
they probably. I don't think. I think that each one of them is holding out for the best possible scenario on their side, and they don't want peace. Well, they don't want to negotiate. That's for sure. I think that they should negotiate. I think Netanyahu should negotiate, must negotiate for a peaceful settlement with the Palestinian people who represent the Palestinians. I think that I think there can be 2 states living side by side, but it's like that has always, it's like that's not enough. When we talk about the political context within our small little sphere of politics, or maybe large sphere of politics, that's not enough for a lot of people on the left. So if they would rather maybe not you, Jamal.
No, no, it's not that. I've never heard anyone say Israel shouldn't exist. Like I've never heard anyone.
I have heard. Then they all message me. And by the way, that's pretty much if you saw the tweets from Abby Martin's producer, he's basically stating those things. So my vantage point is there needs to be peace. It is a brutal occupation. There is, Hamas and other terrorists within the Palestinian side are also part of the equation as to why there's no peace. And I don't think that this cycle, it's a continual cycle of violence. It is, Trump is moving the embassy to Jerusalem. This is voted 90-0 in the Senate. Even Bernie Sanders voted on it. And hold on.
Yeah, I want to talk about that one.
Yeah, I get you that in a second.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. You went to that. I was like, oh yeah, I want to talk about that. Go for it.
And then what takes place is then there are protests. Hamas launches some rockets. Now there's overwhelming force. And it's the same thing. It's the same cycle. And then it's, send H.A. Goodman or other people who are saying, hey, maybe you want to look at both sides. Send them pictures of dead bodies because that will bolster your Twitter argument. And then, I don't play that game. So I don't send pictures of dead bodies of Jews. Like I don't go there. So, but they go there. So that's the thing. Like it's this constant, and I see more of an emphasis, and not on you, Jamal, because you are like an honest, reasoned intellectual. But I see an emphasis on, oh my God, this is a fantastic opportunity to get on my soapbox and judge people and tell them how horrible they are. Yay! So it's kind of like, I see this very much in politics, especially from people who claim to be liberal. It's, let me tell you how immoral you are. But what about the immorality you're not seeing? No, you're a Nazi. Okay, that doesn't really, you're not addressing my point, which is a valid point, which you literally can't address, because if you did, it would undermine your vantage point. So, but go on.
I don't know if
you're not that way, Jamal. There are people who are not that way, and there are people who are that way. And
I've felt myself a few times where I was, let me tell you how more immoral you are. So look, that's a lefty. As a lefty, that's a lefty thing. They always say with the conscience of the nation. Part of that being a conscience is this thing of, oh, this is horrible behavior. This is bad behavior. That's not always necessarily the best thing in the world. Not always the best thing to deal with conversation, because at the point we call somebody immoral, it's hard to have that conversation with the person that you've just called immoral. But I'm not looking at it through that lens. I look at it through this lens of the two sides in this conflict. There are more than two sides, but mainly two sides. One side is overwhelming force. One side has an army, military, is essentially a well-stocked military with nuclear weapons, and a big brother sending $3 billion with ideas of more if they need it. The issues for lefties here is not that they want Israel destroyed. That's not it. I don't think that's it. I think many of them feel a particular way. I think many of them feel that the occupation is immoral, me being one of them. And in saying that, and you're looking at these two sides, one side looks to be a rebuff of the other. That's all. That's where this is coming from. It's not coming from this ethereal thing. They look at what takes place. They look at the human rights thing. They look at the kids being killed. They look at these kids being put in prison. They look at this going on for 50 years. And yes, you can make a case that both sides were fucking around in regards to getting something done. But one side has an overwhelming capacity of force, and one side has a military occupation of the other side. And it seems massively unfair to say, well, why didn't you say anything about Hamas when this other side has a massive military occupation of the other side? You can bring up Hamas.
But when I say that, when I say, what about the other side? It's not to prevent
It
critique,
feels like it
really.
diminishes the entirety of the thing. I think that's what it feels like. When people hear it, it feels like it's saying, like it's putting in a strong argument for something, where the disparity between these two things is so massive. It's I'm trying to think of a, you have something that's like 95%, the other one is 5%, and you're like, why aren't you complaining about this 5%? It's like,
But
I
yeah, I know.
understand that 5%
And this is
exists.
the thing. I'm not even. I
Does that
don't.
make sense? I mean, I'm trying to make
Yeah,
this
no, I
standpoint of
understand. I
why
totally.
lefties
I.
have
I.
asses in a Twitter over this one. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe HA said this.
I
And
can't.
I never,
I understand that, but I never see. That's the thing. The first thing Abby Martin said to me in a tweet was, "Oh, you're demanding." First of all, she said,
she's
"You're
like
acting like
Trump
a typical
supporter, something like
Trump
that.
supporter," which I'm like, "What?" And then she said, "You're demanding people talk about Hamas just to criticize Israel." I never said that. People can criticize Israel all the time. I've criticized Israel. I've written critiques of Israel. Most of my writing is critiques of Israel. What I am saying is that when there are two sides, it might not be the same proportion. There obviously is a greater power, but there are two sides. And the dynamic is a cycle of violence that leads to nowhere. The whole Hamas, hey, I'm told, not from you, I'm told, well, Hamas is launching rockets. What do you expect it to do? Well, what do you expect Israel to do? Not retaliate with the overwhelming force it has?
No,
That's
I
what's
agree
going
with you on
to, no,
so I
and I'm saying,
partially agree with you on this. Like,
I'm saying that that's what the reality on the ground is. If Mexico or Canada launched rockets in the U.S., it would be like a massive war.
yeah,
So what I'm saying is the reality is such where a lot of people on the left say, hey, well, look at the reality. Hamas is, what do you expect them to do? But they don't ever say, well, what do you expect the greater power to do with more military resources? Not saying it's moral, not saying it's right, because I don't agree with the bombing of apartment buildings or hospitals. I'm not saying that. The issue when people critique me is that, well, HA, you're always saying you're not saying, because I'm paranoid that people twist my words, which they usually do. The reality on the ground is that Hamas knows Israel will respond in overwhelming force. They know that. That's why when they launch rockets, it is also part of a campaign. If Israel destroys a hospital, if Israel destroys a building, it's like a PR victory for Hamas. So that is a nasty, disgusting cycle that both parties play a role in. That's
no, I
not.
understand. I do understand. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't understand you. I totally get where you're coming from. I call it a thicket because I have this feeling of, as human beings, what do human beings do when they're in situations? So one country launches a military attack. The other country looks at it and says, okay, I'm going to fire rockets. And the other country says, okay, if you're going to fire rockets, we need to respond in kind because we need to be tough guys and we need to go in and kick some ass in order to stop them from firing rockets. You create this sticking back and forth where the population supports strongmen because they believe that the strongmen are going to keep them safe, be it Hamas or be it the right wing government of Israel. It's a thicket. Like I understand it. I get it. In that sense, I get it. This this let's say, take out morality, take out ethics, take out all that stuff from the conversation. If you're just looking at bare bones, how do human beings respond in situations like this? Human beings respond in the way that these people are responding right now. One side fires rockets, the other side fires overwhelming force. We add immorality to it. But ultimately, if you look at it purely from a militaristic standpoint, it makes sense from both sides. At the same token, it propagates the issue. Um, so I understand. I understand where you're coming from. You're making this point that, look, there is another factor, part of this. You can't necessarily completely and entirely blame Israel for this thing of peace falling apart, of them not having peace in the region. I understand it. I I blame Israel more. I blame Israel far more. And yes, you're right. There's a disparity of force between those two, and you can't necessarily expect a country that has an overwhelming amount of force to somehow just fire rockets in the same way. You know what I mean? It's like
And I respect your vantage point 100%.
Yeah.
If you could, it is completely logical and rational to blame Israel far more. If that's your vantage point, I'm not going to. I have never said I've never said a person cannot blame Israel far more than the Palestinians. I've never said
I
that.
didn't take that way.
Yeah, I've never said that. What I have received from simply saying, hey, you know what, there are other factors contributing to this entire disgusting mess. What I have received is, so HA, you therefore support all list of atrocities, photos, everything horrible. You're a bad person. Oh my God. You know, here are links. You know, these people, it's like, I have like 7 people sending me links. And I'm like, okay, so should I send you links too? Because I'm that type of guy. Like, also, like, if you only saw my link, maybe you would then realize I was right. So that whole mentality of, well, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. You haven't seen my link. It's that type of thing where I have always stated there are 2 sides, and I have always stated that Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the fact that even Fatah, the West Bank, and Gaza, the 2 governments, don't get along with one another, the fact that they commit atrocities as well, is a factor.
Let me ask you this. Explain what the 2 governments not getting along have anything to do with it. I missed that part. Like, so why do you believe that those 2 governments not getting along in some way makes the occupation less?
Because you'll never
more understandable. I don't
because
understand.
you'll never see a salon writer write about, oh, look, you know, there are Palestinians committing atrocities among Palestinians. There is Hamas committing atrocities among there's Hamas torturing and executing extrajudicially Palestinians. You don't see that. You definitely hear the pontificating and the grandstanding and Israel's horrible, horrible, horrible. Well, then, okay, is there another side? I've just always said there's another side. And I guess to the point, I just find it intellectually disingenuous. When you discuss with me, Jamal, you have a reasoned vantage point where you disagree with me, 70%. But we have a discussion here. And, like, even, when we talk, you're like, no, I mean, it's not extermination. This isn't like, this is a horrible, horrible thing. But I find it disingenuous, number one, for people on the left who are saying that Israel is engaged in genocide and shouldn't exist, doesn't have a right to exist. I ask a simple question, and I asked this of Abby Martin's producer. Well, do you support Hamas? The response is, I'm not going to fall for your right-wing trick, because you're fucking scared of saying I support Hamas, because it's a very dangerous statement to make. Economically, everything. So so if the person comes at me the vantage point of Israel, devil, evil, Satan, Skeletor, oh, well, what do you think of Hamas? Fuck you. You're never going to bait me into that horrible question. Okay. I understand how intellectually honest you are now. You can't even say you support Hamas, even though Satan itself, you believe Israel and the Jews there are Satan themselves. But you can't
it's not one or the other. Come on. Neither is an option. You could say, I understand that occupation. And then you say, do you support Hamas? And they say, no, I don't support Hamas because I think Hamas is counterproductive.
But that inevitably, but see, the thing is, when someone says that to me, I stop debating them, because my point is already, it's not like I'm doing a victory lap because people are dying. My point is just, well, do you acknowledge there's another side? Okay, fine. But when people don't acknowledge there's another side and then refuse to even state that, Hamas is a terror group or I support Hamas, I'm like, okay, I know where you're coming from now.
So the goal in asking about Hamas is to indicate bias. It's saying if you can't even get across that says, yes, Hamas exists, then I think you're going to be biased. And so I can somewhat disregard the rest of the conversation. Is that the reason we're bringing Hamas?
It's twofold. It's one, to at least force a person to acknowledge that there is another side, and two, hold them to whatever crazy statements they make. And also 3, just to show that they're phonies. Because if they're so tough on Twitter and they're saying Israel's exterminating, it's a genocide. Do you support Hamas? The coward runs away, doesn't say, accuses me of right-wing, So it's like, It's like this, you know, there are people, and by the way, there are people who, when I ask them and they're like, fuck yeah, I support the terrorist group. I'm glad that they're launching rockets and killing Israel. I'm glad. Then I stop debating, because I'm like, okay, well, that's where you stand.
Those people are angry for, I guess, I understand what you're saying. I understand. I guess, and I don't want to beat a dead horse. I guess I look at it, I'm a lefty. Like, and it being a lefty, I have this thing of, this thing in me of, oh my God, those people are suffering. And not just being a lefty. My grandfather was Native American. African American. I don't really identify as African American, but certainly my grandmother and my grandfather were Cherokees. There's this thing in me from both sides of that spectrum where I look at this in somewhat of a personal way. I understand you're making a point that they don't necessarily have a Martin Luther King. I don't necessarily know if that's fully true, because I don't necessarily know each and everything that goes on in that area. But whether they have a Martin Luther King or not, you have to admit the Hamas thing is somewhat of a reaction to the occupation itself. And lefties look at this in this kind of in this way of, if one wasn't there, the other wouldn't exist. In which case they look at one as being a full-on reaction to the other. So when you're bringing up the Hamas thing, it feels like you're trying to hit them in the knees of saying, well, wait a minute, there's a terrorist organization in there. But from their standpoint, well, yeah, there's a terrorist organization there because there needs to be a terrorist organization there to resist the other occupation. From our standpoint, when I heard that, my thought was, HA is trying to hit people in the knees on this conversation. That's how I felt. Am I wrong? Like, it did feel like HA is trying, and look, and maybe you're right. Maybe when people are having this conversation and they can't necessarily bring up Hamas, maybe you're right. Maybe that does show a certain amount of bias or a certain amount of
I want to respectfully say this. And this is my viewpoint.
Go for it.
If there are any Palestinians watching this discussion, I respectfully say the worst allies you could ever have on the planet are American liberals. And the reason, is that after, I say the truth, because after sending the litany of photos of dead bodies, and after pontificating, and after all the grandstanding, at the end of the day, the issue of a Palestinian state, the issue of a good economy for Palestine, the issue of peace for the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine, that's ranked number 10 on the liberal vantage point from what I see. 1, 2, 3 to 9 is Israel bad, you're bad, I'm good, I'm bad. Well, then is there any peace? When has Ben Norton or Abby Martin or all of these people said, here, we need another round of negotiations? Israel is doing all these horrible things, but there has to be some kind of emphasis on negotiation. There has to be some kind of peace deal. It's always the American liberal mentality is, or the people, the anti-Israel, you'd say, I don't know what that mentality of only focus on the crimes of Israel is zero end game for stopping the crimes. They know very well.
What do you think a peace deal would be? Like, what do you think a decent?
Well, there are a lot of, look, there's a reason that peace has not been achieved, because both sides have demands. And both sides say, okay, you know what? We tried to negotiate. It's not working. Now we're going to go back to the same cycle of violence.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, and I don't want this to happen. And the difference between me and I'm not talking about you, Jamal, because we're having a discussion. We're having a discussion. The difference between me and the quote unquote liberal who is, hates Israel, is that I understand the longer this goes, the more bloodshed that takes place. The fact that unless there's a discussion where there are both sides, I'm not saying that a person has to say it's 80% Hamas and Fatah, or oh, no, it's only 60% Israel. You could say 90%, 95% Israel, but also talk about the 5% on the other side of the equation. If you really want some kind of peaceful solution, because at the end of the day, they have to, both Netanyahu and Hamas, the extremes of each, The extreme is from Israel, the religious extreme from Israel, the religious extreme from the Palestinians have to shake hands, and that has to be a negotiation that takes place where there's a Palestinian state. Eventually, it'll happen when both sides realize that we can't go on any longer. The Palestinians realize we can't do this anymore, and the Israelis realize that.
But do you believe? But that, I guess that's what I'm getting at. Netanyahu doesn't necessarily have a need or even a reason to come to some kind of peace agreement. Ultimately, the more conflict there is between those two things, the more he stabilizes his power base. And at a certain point, why do you need to have a peace agreement when you just take the land? You have the backing of the United States. He has all the military in the world that he needs. He has all the money that he needs in order to fund that military. Isn't it more likely that he's just going to continuously take land until there's nothing else left, and then you say, okay, look, there's not enough land for you guys to take on. So,
but it's not just Netanyahu's not there forever. There's Tzipi Livni. There's different, like there's the left and the right in Israel. Israel has elections. You're not always going to have one government, but I can tell you right now, Hamas does specifically, and this is what the suicide bombers specifically did also, when Yitzhak Rabin was murdered by a Jew. They specifically had a wave of terror attacks to ensure Sharon won, to ensure the right won. So Hamas knows that part of the equation, I'm not saying this is 100%. I'm not saying it's 100%. I'm saying part of the equation to the extremes is to ensure that the other foil engages in terror attacks, or kind of gives them the raison d'etre. So each time Hamas launches a rocket, the right in Israel can say, "You see, how can you make peace with these people?
Yeah,
look what's taking place."
HA, you just said when the Israeli murdered the guy, the peace negotiator in this way. I can't think of the guy's name. The one you just
mentioned.
Yitzhak Rabin. That they were terror attacks in response to that murder of that particular person. Israel goes.
It wasn't terror attacks response. No, it wasn't. Yeah. Go on. I'm sorry.
But Israel destroys houses in retribution for things that took place. Meaning, if this particular person was a suicide bomber, they would go and attack the house of where that particular person lived in retribution, like these kind of revenge attacks in this case. I guess what I'm saying is, how is one bad for one, but the other one engages in the same behavior? The terror attacks
I'm not saying I didn't say they cancel. I'm not saying anything cancels out
Okay, fair enough. You're right.
Hamas and Netanyahu both look at each other and you say, you see.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they do.
So they both and that's my whole thing is, I'm not justifying the brutality of the occupation.
And to be fair, you're right. You never said that you were justifying the thing, and you never said that the terror attacks were good or bad or anything else. So I'm sorry. That's on me. That's my fault. I'm putting words in your mouth. That's true. Let me ask you this: the Trump thing, Trump moving the I found this amazing. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem. This blew me away because one president after the next has promised to do this. One president after the next. And regardless of what Obama did and everything else, ultimately, he also seemed to be perfectly okay with doing this particular thing. He just didn't follow through with it. Donald Trump gets in office. Donald Trump does it, and everybody's heads explodes. And my thought was, well, wait a minute. Certainly, the United States is giving these guys $3 billion a year, and the United States gives these guys weapons and protects them in the Security Council. Is there any, is there anyone in doubt on the United States supports on this? Trump moved it, people had flipped out. Now, what was your perspective on this? I looked at it as this is probably a bad idea. There's going to be a wave of attacks based on this, and there was a reason why all these other presidents wanted to do it, but didn't necessarily do it. Do you think this is good, bad, somewhere in between? Do you think it doesn't matter? What's your perspective?
I think that it is a good thing for the following reasons. Number one, every president said they were going to do it. President Obama, Bush, Clinton. Senate voted 90-0, including Bernie Sanders. and it forces, in a way, in a roundabout way, forces peace.
How does it force peace? Explain
Because
that.
the longer the stalemate takes place, the longer the Palestinian and Israeli factions do not go to the bargaining table, the more the reality on the ground is that the greater power will continue to achieve whatever, quote unquote, victories on their side. We already had, from 1995, the Embassy Act, and then you had the Senate, then you had American presidents, and now Trump is doing it. It's Israel is a sovereign nation. Its capital is Jerusalem. To say that, well, my God, now there's going to be a wave of terror attacks because of moving an embassy. Check it out. Check out what I'm trying to convey. Mm-hmm. The act of moving an embassy could lead to terror attacks, could lead to widespread chaos. Then how on earth could tomorrow there be a simple peace deal? Israel moves out of the territories and everything, and they should just go ahead and shake hands with Hamas. And, if the simple act of another country, it's not Israel. It's not like this is not like Israel or the U.S. telling people, Hamas, move Gaza City, change your capital. This is, okay, we're the United States, not Israel. We're just moving to the capital that Israel has already stated is a capital, Jerusalem. If that alone leads to this widespread, panic, and imagine how difficult the negotiations are. Yeah. And furthermore, the Arabs, the Palestinians live in East Jerusalem, which is still, which could still be the capital of Palestine in a future state. So this does not mean that East Jerusalem will never be the capital of, or could never be, in some way viewed as the capital for a future Palestinian state. That's still part of the negotiation. But so
why are other countries upset about this then? Like, if you believe that this is going to somehow force peace, or it's going to somehow make things easier for peace, I got to be honest, I don't understand how this makes things easier for peace.
Because it angers,
because it pisses people off.
Because they don't. Because their vantage point is that, well, it'll hurt the peace talk, but there's no peace talks now. So there's just a stalemate with rockets and overwhelming force or retaliation. It's like at the end of the day, there's so many factors at play. Time is on the greater power side.
Yeah, it is. Agreed.
It's not on the person who's the weaker power. And I'm not saying that in terms of being a Jew or Palestinian. Generally, throughout Jewish history, Jews have been the weaker power and have been persecuted. So this is one of the very few times in Jewish history where Jews are the greater power.
I know, AJ, but that can't be a justification for anything. I mean, come on.
I never said it was. I'm just saying. I'm bringing
it into the conversation, saying that prior they used to be the oppressed population. This is one of the first few times. I don't think that matters. I guess I'm trying to get to this thing of, why do other countries around the world think this is such a horrible idea, and why are all these other countries condemning the United States behavior?
Because they think it's going to hurt the peace process.
But it is going to hurt the peace process. Like, I understand you say there is no peace process, but you have Israel stealing land. In addition to stealing land, you have this kind of occupation where there's a lawless zone in which these guys are inhabiting. You have the entire world condemning the behavior of what's taking place with the Israeli government. And now you have the embassy being moved into contested territory, meaning the United States officially saying, yes, we've decided that screw the peace process, screw all this other stuff, we're just going to give it over to these guys. My point was, yes, these guys had already had it in the bag, but this ups the ante in a sense of there is no peace process. We know we told you that there was a peace process. We know that you were waiting on the United States and the benevolence of Israel to award you this particular land or this particular territory, and your charade has been removed. No such thing is going to take place. The United States is going to back Israel regardless. And yes, Jerusalem is now the embassy that the United States is recognizing. but the rest of the world doesn't. That's kind of what I'm trying to nail down. It's not just about the peace thing. It's also about this thing of they consider Israel a territory. Fair enough. They consider it a country. Yes, fair enough. Israel is not going anywhere. But it seems like Israel is continuously screaming that other people don't want Israel to exist while at the same time preventing another country from existing. I mean, even getting angry at the point where they try to go through a peace process.
This is the thing. Every single time there is, whether it's Madrid or Oslo, all the other times that there are peace negotiations, they break down, and then there's a cycle of violence.
Yeah.
And then it's the same thing all over again. What I advocate is for both sides to negotiate every single year, continuously, without end. I want a Palestinian state. I want peace. You'll never hear those two phrases from a lot of people. I know that I always go there, but it's the truth. The same people who claim to, hate Israel and, defend the Palestinians, you will never hear an emphasis on, okay, well, when is the negotiation gonna happen? If a person wants to pontificate and focus 99.9% of their energy on only Israel's side, at least spend 0.01 on, well, maybe two sides should negotiate, and maybe, I don't know, Hamas should not want to destroy Israel, which is part of its charter. So, I mean, in this
that
whole
chart has changed, by the way. I looked up Hamas's thing because in your videos you mentioned that these guys were war criminals and everything else, and I did research on the Hamas thing, and you're right. Hamas has been cited with war crimes. So did Israel, cited with war crimes, and anybody who's in this kind of conflict ends up in those situations. And yes, Hamas is the elected government of that particular region of the world, even though other countries consider these guys essentially terrorists. So yes, that's also true. It is also true that Hamas, they get into the cycle of violence back and forth, Israel and Hamas. And yes, I agree with you. Hamas is somewhat counterproductive in the sense that you're not going to win a war with a country that has nuclear weapons. So it's like, yes, I also agree with you that negotiation. I guess my disagreement here is I have no belief at all that Netanyahu wants a peace deal. If anything, I suspect that he looks at it as Trump is moving the embassy to Jerusalem. That's great. We have carte blanche now to take as much land as possible, as much land as we want, because the United States is going to back us in this particular endeavor. Now, you may say Hamas is going to fire rockets and everything else, which is going to allow Netanyahu to strengthen his grip on power as these guys go to another right-wing government in order to protect them. I agree with you. I agree. I full on agree. Like taking out ethics, taking out morality, taking out everything else, and just looking at it from the bare bones of how do people react in certain situations, and do people advantage themselves off of the misery and the shittiness of the situation? The answer is, of course, yes. The answer is, of course, yes. On that, I agree with you. I agree. I don't think Trump is looking for a peace deal. Maybe he is. I suspect Donald Trump is. Yeah, I don't think he's looking for a peace deal. I think he's looking at easy wins. And for him, he said he was going to do it, so he's going to do it. The other presidents have said they were going to do it and backed out of that particular decision, one after the next. Donald Trump comes in and says, I'm going to do what these other presidents don't do, what didn't do. So on that, yeah, I agree. It's like if you're going to, when these other guys, I don't agree with the action per se. I think the action is a horrible move. It's contested territory. I don't think you should go around and just automatically put your embassy in somewhere that's contested. And it is also true that it seems minor to put the embassy in a particular place. The United States can put its embassy in where it wants. But it's the statement that it makes. And I suspect that the reason for such condemnation all around the world is because of the statement that it makes. The United States is making a determination that contested territory that was up for grabs, now belongs to somebody else that the United States has been close to. Gotta be honest, man, I don't see how that helps the peace deal at all. I mean, if anything, it
territory.
The
Jerusalem is not up for grabs. Jerusalem is in 1967. It was the holy sites were controlled by Jordan, and Jerusalem is controlled by by Israel. In terms, and Israel has always stated that Jerusalem is its capital. East Jerusalem is where the majority of the Palestinians within Jerusalem live, and this does not destroy any hope that in future negotiations that could also be a capital for the Palestinian people, East Jerusalem.
If the land were back to the 1967 borders, would that include Israel or Jerusalem in those borders? Within the borders
No,
of
it couldn't. No, the 1967, because before 1967, Israel did not have control of the holy city.
That's my point.
So
I mean, many of these guys agree to go back to the 1967 borders. If Israel is saying we're not going back anywhere, we're keeping Jerusalem as our capital, then the idea of the 1967 borders go out the window.
Yeah,
this
but
is kind
the
of
Golan
a
Heights,
contested territory.
If you went back to 1967 borders, you'd have to give the Golan Heights to Assad, and then you have ISIS controlling the Golan Heights.
Yeah, but Assad is almost eradicated ISIS at this point. I mean, ultimately, you're talking about getting the Syrian government.
ISIS is still is still in Syria. Syria is not.
Syria, but Russia and Syria has been taking that territory back. I mean, ISIS is going to be destroyed at a certain point. It's not necessarily giving it to ISIS. Let me say it this way. Do you believe that Assad and Russia would leave that land with ISIS, or do you believe that they're going to eradicate ISIS, in which case they're going to take back Golan Heights?
Yeah, I think they're very difficult. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to say. Israel must go ahead and go pre-1967 and ignore the realities of today in terms of the repercussions that could take place if you do that.
And look, it will be a negotiation. I agree with you on this. It's negotiation. 67 was what, 60 years ago? So yeah, at this point, the stronger power has more land. It's a negotiation. I guess I'm just making the point that it does not seem like there is any impetus at all for Israel to negotiate at this point, since they can essentially take land carte blanche, and the United States will co-sign whatever they do.
Well, I don't.
Isn't that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, that is somewhat fair, but also, I mean, there's also the issue of you have to have West Bank and Gaza united under one government. And right now, there are two different governments, one in Gaza, one in West Bank.
Yeah, but Israel split that up with that wall. I mean, that wall was illegal when they put that wall between those two things. They wanted to split up those two governments. They didn't necessarily want those governments coordinating as one single force. I understand what you mean when you're saying there's two different governments, and those two different governments don't necessarily get along with each other. But that was somewhat of a political gimmick.
But the hatred between Hamas and Fatah is not only Israel's fault. They just hate each other. They have two different political ideologies.
What's the political difference in ideologies?
One is Islamist and one's more secular. One will not recognize Israel, and Fatah does.
So this is more of this conversation between the moderate and radical. Is that fair? Like King versus Malcolm X.
Yeah, but Malcolm X never killed anybody.
No, he never killed anybody.
But that's the thing. I mean, I don't think. See, that's the thing. It's very difficult. I don't see any historical parallels between the insanity of the Middle East conflict. I don't see any history.
It's in a different part of the world, AJ. Come on. Like the United States, I agree with you that there is a difference in the political ideology or the tools that these guys use. But if we're saying that Fatah is more the radical, the other one is more the moderate, then yeah, King was more of the moderate, Malcolm X was more the radical. These things play out. I mean, granted, the intensity of these things may be different, but these things do play out from the standpoint of, from country to country, the strategies that are being used. Even the left. Take the left. You have people who are more moderate. You have like Namika Kant's trying to board the ship of the DNC and this Dementor crowd. You have other people who are the complete Demexic crowd saying that those Dementors are lost their goddamn minds. Like the moderate and the radical thing plays out in every other country. It just depends on how those things play out. In that region of the world, they play out in that particular way. I understand your point, and I'm hoping that this is giving other people more context, that you're not necessarily making this argument of Israel has done nothing wrong and everything else. It clarifies and saying, look, I'm just saying that you guys also need to take Hamas into account if you're going to have these conversations, whatever the degree that you're going to take them into account, if that's 0.5%, if that's 5%, if that's 20%. you should at the very least recognize that there are other sides than Israel to this conflict.
Absolutely. And I will say that,
Okay.
you know, for the record, it's obvious that you disagree with me and you're intellectually consistent and you're honest, and it's been such a joy to speak with you.
Thank you.
But you disagree with me, well, I would say, 60, 70, 80%. Okay, fine. But we've had a rational discussion.
Yeah,
and I can tell you, because of this rational civil discussion, you're going to experience so much hate from people who will likely say, Jamal, you didn't get HA on this. He's lying. And why did you give up that vantage point? Da da da. And it's like, at the end of the day, there are very few people who, like you, like me, are focused on an eventual peaceful solution. That's why when I say, like, if there are Palestinian people watching, God bless you, and I want a state, Palestinian state, peaceful alongside Israel. I do believe that Palestinians should have a state, but the worst, in my view, the worst allies you could ever have are American liberals. But yeah, I already made that point. But my whole thing is my whole thing is, from the pontificating should lead to, okay, no, how do we end this? How do we end this carnage? How do we end this either imbalance of power or this cycle of violence? Or, not to not critique Israel, but what is the political, pragmatic way towards a peaceful settlement so people can live? And believe me, I understand that, Israel's doing things to where making negotiations difficult, but also Hamas and the governments of the Palestinian people are doing things to make it difficult. That's been my entire point. And I just would like some intellectual honesty from, definitely not from you, because you're extremely intellectually honest, but from people who, if the vantage point is Israel's 100% at fault, not even 0.1%, Hamas or Islamic Jihad or whatever, 100% at fault, then what's their vantage point of Hamas? Do they support it? Indifferent? Whatever? Is it a terror group? Because any response shows how intellectually honest that side is. If indeed that side says Israel's 100% at fault.
Okay. And let me say it on this one. Let me end on this note. I've been to Israel, like I said. It's a beautiful country. Like, I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv looks like Beverly Hills. You cross over as an American into the other side into Bethlehem. It looks like it is a shit fest. Like, and I say this from the standpoint of the people who are living there, not because anything's wrong with the people, but oh my God, the territory is horrendous. It's like you come from that place and you have this perspective of, yeah, something's wrong here. This shouldn't be this way. And you start looking back at the history of this particular land and everything else, and you say to yourself, okay, they're occupying this territory. And the responses of people when they're being occupied are going to be a particular way, because if you slap a person, it is very natural for that person to get pissed off and want to slap you back. This does not just go towards the Palestinians, by the way. This also goes towards Israel's existence in and of itself. What is a perspective of an individual growing up in a shitty situation? And do you believe that you can continuously and always keep those people boxed into this kind of open air ghetto where they're never going to touch you or never going to get their hands on you? At some point, something is going to take place where there's going to be some kind of eruption and somebody is going to get injured. And yes, it's going to start this entire process over again. I have no expectation that Israel is going to open the borders. And when I was over there and I was having this conversation with this Belgian Palestinian, she was making this argument that Israel should open the borders. And I thought she was absolutely nuts. I was like, fuck you mean open the borders? I was like, if they open the borders, are you going to have this expectation that this is going to happen to Israelis from people being pissed off from the conditions that Israelis had kept these people in over this course of time? I consider this to be a thicket because I think it is natural as natural can be for people to respond in a certain way if they're being occupied and if they're being put in hellish conditions. By the same token, if I'm being honest, and I say that people respond in a particular way when they're being put in hellish conditions, then when those people are let out those hellish conditions, you can expect somewhat of a reprisal for the hellish conditions that the people were kept into. It is not an easy situation, honestly. And this idea of just giving their land back, I lean on that side. I honestly do. I lean on this thing of Palestine should have their own state. And this idea of being a stateless territory, that's just kind of, that just seems insane to me.
Yeah, but it's not, so I agree with you, but it's not, I don't think, see, the issue is not just,
but you can understand if a kid is growing up in Palestine.
No, I get that. I get that. What I'm saying, when you said she just give them their own state, it's not only that. There are certain, I mean, I love speaking with you, and this is like going on 2 hours. So it's like,
I know, right? That's what I'm saying.
That's like that's a whole. Let's put it this way. That's another 2-hour conversation on just negotiations. And my whole thing is, it's not. See, that's the thing. It's not so simple that Israel can just be like, yeah, just give it to Hamas. I mean, without even Hamas saying they're not going to destroy. I know you're not saying that, but I'm saying it's not just, it's not so easy that, Israel can say, well, because there are no Israeli soldiers in Gaza. Gaza is 100%. The Hamas controls all of Gaza. To
a degree. I mean, come on, to a degree. I mean,
but I'm saying Israel left. Israel left Gaza.
Israel left Gaza in a way. Come on. Israel still owns that particular. Israel at any particular point can put its military in that area. It's blockaded all around and have these kind of open air ghetto where these guys are pinned into a particular spot.
My only point
that they control it, but control to what degree?
Of course, my only point was that it's not as simple as knock it off, guys. Israel give. That's all. That's my only point.
Let me ask you this, and I'll leave it on this. I am curious. What is your definition of Zionism?
My definition.
I hope that's not overly.
Jamal. I went to growing up early on in my life, up until the age of 10, a very, very religious Hebrew school, very religious. Okay, not once was there any discussion of race. Not once was there any discussion of blood or DNA or anything. It was, essentially, the Jews have been persecuted forever, and this is one of the few times we, quote unquote, won. And so that is, and then it was an emphasis, when you're talking about Israel. Well, this was the early 80s, late 70s, where it's like, Israel was the underdog in terms of surrounded by powerful nations or Arab nations that wanted it to destroy it.
Right.
So in 67, 73, 48, 67, 73, in 73, it actually there was a second where it could have lost the war and been overrun. So the vantage point was always like, Israel is the underdog. So that's the vantage point that had nothing to do with. The Zionism is the belief that Jews should have a homeland. Had nothing to do with race. And this whole notion where Zionism is racism, it's like if you say, it's like when the right, you've heard this from the right says liberalism is a mental disease.
Yeah, right.
That's stupid. It's a dumb thing to say, right? And it's such a stupid thing to say, but they believe it and they keep saying it. Liberalism is a mental disease. Liberalism is so the whole Zionism is racism.
They just don't. They don't care about other people. So they don't understand this idea of people caring about other people. They're just unempathetic. They have a mental illness. In fact, I say it myself sometimes that the right has a mental illness. But that's just it. Those things are relative. I'm sorry, and it's kind of besides the point. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What I'm trying to say is like, when people say Zionism is racism, that is not accurate, and it's not even anything that I've learned in my life. When I learned about the creation of a Jewish state, Jews were kicked out thousands of years ago from the very place that they live now. So, and that's historical record. It's not religious. This is actual. If you study the Middle East, you can see that historical record Jews were there. And a big part of Jewish history is, from Moses to everything else is, we're finally back. That's the whole thing. We're finally back to, and Jerusalem is in Hebrew prayers. It's always been a very, very important part of the culture. But nowhere did I ever learn that Jews were superior in terms of a race. This new mentality of Zionism as racism, I think, is pure propaganda from perhaps taking the quotes of religious zealots on the Jewish side. And just by the way, the average Israeli doesn't like the religious zealots on the Jewish side. In fact, there was this big thing in Israel, like from what I remember, like in buses, like I guess the very religious people would I can't get the story right. Anyway, like the religion in any group, no group likes the ultra dogmatic religious side. Right. It's not, no one really likes that. So to take maybe a quote from a right-wing extremist who is religious and then turn that into, well, this is all of Zionism, so anyone who wants a Jewish state is racist, and look at the roads. One person sent me a link. These roads, these are Jewish roads, and Palestinians are not allowed on them. And the occupation that's taking place is completely like military and political, which is brutal. And I'm not defending it as, oh, it's great and it should be there. It has nothing to do with race, because I actually was a contributor to the Times of Israel. I can still contribute, and the Jerusalem Post I was contributing. So I heard this ridiculous notion that I think like the Jewish people saying that Jews are a race, and I don't believe that Jews are a race, and because anyone can be Jewish and it's a religion. Right. But then I said, if Jews are a race, congratulations, you're related to Hamas, which is kind of a funny way of saying these people are all related DNA in terms of a lot of, like, if you look at, there are a lot of Israelis and a lot of Palestinians, you could not tell the difference who they are. Yeah. You cannot tell the difference. So it's very difficult to say that Zionism is racism when you can't even tell the difference between the two.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious. I've heard, I've read about it, but it's one of those things of, okay, I understand the letter of it, the reality of it. You know what I mean? It's like there's a difference sometimes between a letter of something and reality of something. Dude, I really appreciate you coming on. There were a few people on Twitter who were like, why are you giving HA a platform? It's like, why wouldn't I give HA a platform? He has his own platform. It's like giving anybody anything. I was immensely curious about your perspective on this. Because it, gotta be honest, it slightly caught me off guard. I was like, I was like, HA is arguing that people need to back up Hamas if they're criticizing Israel. What the hell? And then I saw the thing on Abby Martin. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. These guys
I'll be debating in a far more quote unquote spirited manner than our, peaceful discussion. I believe Robbie Martin and I will be debating on Wednesday.
No way. Okay. Yeah, on my channel. That should be interesting.
So everyone who hates me, who I haven't even, can I tell you, Jamal? I haven't even checked your comment section. Usually I check my comment section. I haven't even checked your comment section.
I've glanced a few times.
Yeah. I can only imagine how popular I am. But but yeah, as I tell all the people who hate me, watch my channel. Hopefully Wednesday I will have a spirited debate with Robbie Martin about this issue.
Look, man, the only thing you can ever do is give your perspective. And that's all you can do. I mean, there are going to be some times where people are like, oh, God, this guy's horrible. I look at this stuff as you're not going to agree with everybody on everything. There's nobody. It's like there's no situation where somebody's going to say is going to be like the word of God and everything that you say you're going to agree.
But your brain and my brain we don't work this way. When we hear something, the knee-jerk reaction, when you hear something you don't like, and when I hear something I don't like, we don't say, so you agree with this? That's not, or you condone this? Like, that's not the way you and I think.
It depends. I can be as biased as the next person. It depends on
Yeah,
what
but generally, I don't think, like, from what I've seen of your, just what I've seen of your work, it's not that knee-jerk reaction, and I find it interesting. This is such a supercharged issue that it's like, it's almost like people become schizophrenic when you talk to them about it, because they're like, oh, then you're saying this. I'm like, I'm not really saying that.
Yeah, it's because of what's at stake. It's just the gravity of what takes place, and this thing has been dicking around for 50 years, and it's like, Jesus Christ, it's like, what are y'all doing? He's like, come on, man, come to some kind of resolution. This is fucking around for God knows how long. And
But I appreciate, I want to tell you, I
really,
appreciate, being on your channel.
dude, I appreciate you coming on my channel. I really do. So I appreciate you having a conversation about this, and hopefully it clarifies to some of the people who are having to go at you about how you actually feel about it. So,
well,
that's my hope anyway.
I appreciate the discussion, and I just want to thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been an honor for me, and I want to thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Guys, I would like thank HA for coming on to the soapbox. And I would like to thank everybody who's here. Oh my God, we have a lot of people here. I would like to thank everybody that showed up. So you guys have a good night. And I don't think I may do another video tonight. I'm not sure. But thanks, everybody. I appreciate everyone coming on. So much appreciated.